The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Just a day after getting interrupted by those Black Lives Matter protesters at a campaign event in Seattle, Bernie Sanders, who is a senator from Vermont running for the Democratic presidential nomination, released a pretty detailed platform on how to combat racial inequality. And as I said when we were talking about the protesting of Bernie Sanders events by supposed Black Lives Matter protesters, my thought was Bernie Sanders should be the lowest priority candidate to be protested because he has the longest and strongest track record on fighting the systemic inequalities that can be seen through the lens of race in the United States. And continuing to draw record crowds, reportedly 20 to 28,000 people in Portland, Bernie Sanders expanded on this platform that he put together. And I don't know if people understand what it means, by the way, to, as a non-incumbent primary candidate, be filling stadiums the way Bernie is doing. And in doing so, he is able to tell more people about this platform. And I'll tell you some of the elements of it. And what I like the most about this platform, Lewis, is in all the elections we've covered, campaign promises and plans are often deliberately vague and are designed as such to prevent really having to explain what you will do and how you will do it. And what I love about Bernie's plan is that it's specific, it's actionable, it's reasonable. It is the complete opposite of the entire tone and vibe of the recent Republican debate, that is for sure. Bernie Sanders put out these policy proposals that focus on 4 central types of violence that he says is waged against Black and brown Americans: physical, political, legal, and economic. I'll give you some of the bullet points. Each of these bullet points is, of course, worthy of much more discussion, and we'll give each much more discussion in the coming months, but I wanted to give you some of the overviews. With regard to police reforms, Bernie Sanders suggests demilitarization of police forces. We've been talking about that for years, Lewis, and it is absolutely important. A federal program which will give police body cameras to police. We know that in test cases, complaints about improper use of force by police drop drastically when a comprehensive police body camera program is instituted. Increasing police transparency and accountability. This was a less specific proposal. Hopefully we'll hear more details from Bernie in the future. And an end to mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. That line alone, Lewis, hugely significant and probably worthy by itself of an hour program.
Oh, yeah, we could go on all day about the war on drugs and all of that nonsense.
Well, also, Bernie Sanders talking about expanding the Voting Rights Act and also restoring the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, which was destroyed by the Supreme Court last year. This is this provision where if you're in certain states, the legislatures of certain states that were involved in voter discrimination in the past, if they want to change voting law, they need to pre-clear those changes. That is an important provision which was destroyed by the Supreme Court. Bernie Sanders would attempt to restore that, and also wanting to end laws that ban convicted felons from voting. This is an example. You know how I talked, Lewis, about there's this debate where there's Black Lives Matter, and then there's the counter argument, which is, no, all lives matter. We shouldn't be focusing on Black lives. And my point of view was, of course all lives matter. There are specific reasons why we need to be focusing in some ways on Black lives, but improving those areas of Black life, as the term may be, will improve life for everybody. And these provisions from Bernie are perfect examples of how addressing the concerns of Black Lives Matter as a movement, right, aside from these individual protesters protesting Bernie, addressing BLM as a movement is going to improve life for all Americans.
Yeah, I think it's logical that when you improve life for, any American, that improves the lives of the people around them. So I think that makes sense. And I like the bullet points here. Of course, I still think we're just scratching the surface here. I mean,
Absolutely.
We could go into much more detail and we could be way more extensive this. But of course, when a politician gets into too much detail, you lose people. So I guess this works.
Let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump, who is a Republican presidential candidate. Donald Trump, at the very beginning of Thursday night's Republican debate, there was a question asked, will everybody on stage vow or raise your hand if you won't vow not to run as a third party if you eventually lose this primary race? Donald Trump raised his hand. He was the only candidate to raise his hand and say, yeah, I'm not going to rule out that I would run as a third party. He has now repeated that on CNN. He was interviewed on CNN and he said, listen, I don't know where all these reports are coming from. I am not going to rule out the possibility of running as a third party candidate, as he says, if he's not treated fairly in the Republican primary process. Here is Donald Trump in his own words.
But to start off with the politics, this idea of you and a third party run, are you willing to announce this morning that you're going to stick with the GOP, try your luck there, hope for fairness, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't, and no third party run?
No, there's been so much false reporting, Chris, and you know it probably as well as anybody. You know what's been happening. I mean, people are putting out signals and everything else. And look, I'm running as a Republican. I'm leading in every poll. I think you report all these polls. In fact, in the CNN poll, I'm leading very big. And Iowa just came out yesterday where I'm leading substantially in Iowa. We're leading all over the place. And I want to run as a Republican. I want to be the Republican candidate. I think that's absolutely the best chance for winning. The way it's going right now, I'm being treated very nicely. I just want to be treated fairly. And if I am treated fairly, that's the way it's going to be. But I want to keep that door open. I have to keep that door open because if something happens where I'm not treated fairly, I may very well use that door. So anybody that says anything, you know, I hear all of these so-called advisors, and I think you know me well enough to know about all of the advisors that everybody's talking about that don't even exist. So I will tell you, I'll keep the door open. But it's not something I want to do. I want to run as a Republican, and I want to win as a Republican and take it back for the Republicans, for the country, and make America great again. You know,
I don't know if people understand how huge this could be for the Democratic Party. I looked back, Lewis, at some of the numbers from the 2012 election. Let's assume just for a second that Donald Trump's 20% support currently drops to 10%, and ultimately, if he runs as a third-party candidate, only half of that 10% would ultimately vote for Donald Trump. So these are very, very conservative numbers. Let's look at Florida in 2012. President Obama narrowly defeated Mitt Romney in Florida by 73,000 votes. President Obama had 4.235 million votes, and Mitt Romney had 4.162 million votes. 73,000 vote difference. Very small in a state with almost 8.5 million voters. If Donald Trump took his 20% support currently, halved it to 10%, and it halved again to only 5%, that would have increased President Obama's margin of victory from 73,000 votes to 50,000 votes if we imagine Trump, Romney, and Obama. This is a huge, huge difference. And if you think of states like Indiana or Arizona, which were already quite close but went to Mitt Romney, those become in play if Donald Trump can just retain a quarter of the support he has now as a third-party candidate. It would drastically change the dynamic.
And I think you meant to say Obama would have won by 500,000 votes, not 50,000 as compared to 73,000.
I'm
right?
sorry. He would have won by 500,000 votes as opposed to 73,000. Yes.
Yes. And so I guess this could wreak havoc. Can Trump do a lot better than we think he could as an independent, though?
Well, no matter, that would be great, right? I'm taking the most conservative idea, which is in some polls, Trump's at 20%. Let's assume he loses half of that support. And let's assume of the 10% that remain that might vote for him, if he runs as a third party, only 5% actually do. Even at that level of support, he could still secure the eventual victory for the Democratic candidate.
Yeah, and he may decide not to run as an independent if he gets sick of the campaigning and the debates and the touring and all of that. I hope he does, of course. And I think we both agree that if he were to run as an independent, he really would stand no chance of winning.
Oh, he would stand absolutely no chance whatsoever of winning the presidency. He would not, unless he, I don't even know what the rules would be in the national debates, the post-primary debates, but I think he would have to have a relatively significant amount of support in an average of national polls to even get up on the stage, which is a whole other problem we've talked about, right? Not including third parties, but bearing in mind what the status quo is, it would be tough for him to even be there. So his only possible influence would be to give the election to the Democratic candidate. So for the time being, Lewis, I'm hoping Donald Trump stays in this thing as long as possible.
Agreed. And if he loses the primary, let's hope he really despises whoever won it.
There's a really great analysis in Raw Story about Donald Trump's policy positions. I know you might be shocked to hear that Donald Trump has policy positions. It was shocking to me to hear as well. He does have some, and there's an analysis in Raw Story which points out that many of them are either completely impossible, delusional, or flat out against the law. This is just the best. Let's go through a couple of them. As MSNBC reported, Donald Trump promised to get rid of corporate taxes and replace them with a 20% tax on imports and a 15% tax on companies that outsource. That would be against the law, Lewis. So that one is out. The 20% tax would be an absolutely straightforward violation of probably every trade law in the U.S., according to Joshua Meltzer, who's a fellow in global economy and development at the Brookings Institute. Two other economic experts agreed. So there's one big idea from Trump, illegal.
Okay, yeah, I don't like that one. If you're worried about companies outsourcing, I think there are some better ways to go about handling that.
Donald Trump says he could have prevented Ford from building new manufacturing plants in Mexico by imposing a 35% tax on vehicles made in Mexico. Unfortunately, Lewis, that is also against the law. As USA Today points out, that would violate the North American Free Trade Agreement. And by the way, only Congress can impose taxes anyway. So yet again, no dice for Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, of all people, should be aware of the framework set up to protect big corporations in this country, right?
And he should be aware also of the rules with regard to Mexico because his menswear line, it was produced there for a very long time. Then he went on to say that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is a, quote, big, fat, horrible lie and a total catastrophe. The problem there is he would replace it with something almost identical. As Bloomberg reported, Trump's ideas include competing private plans, protecting hospitals and government plans for low-income people who get sick. President Obama's Affordable Care Act already does all of these things. So not an illegal suggestion by Trump there, but one that is absolutely silly. Why would you go through the trouble of replacing the Affordable Care Act with something that's essentially identical? And then lastly, we've talked about this one. Donald Trump claims he would bring jobs back from China and Mexico. We talked about this last week. A vast portion of those jobs just don't exist anymore. Those jobs aren't anywhere to be brought back. There's just been an elimination, a disappearance of manufacturing jobs. So yet another one of Trump's ideas that is just, it's on cloud nine, Lewis. It's just not based in reality.
Not really based in reality. He does have one idea that I think many Americans loved, though, and that is building the giant wall.
Right. The one idea that might be possible, at least conceptually, is just building a big wall on the Mexican border. And of course, we could debate whether that would actually do anything about the undocumented immigration problem in the U.S., but at least it's an idea that we can say, oh, okay, yeah, you get the building materials and you start building a wall. That's the only idea that seems to be on planet Earth of Trump's.
Yes, and I think that, hey, you know what? There would be a lot of construction jobs, job creation there. But still pretty silly. So, I don't think that would happen either.
I wonder, Trump's contractors have been caught employing undocumented immigrants on Trump projects. Imagine if Trump finally gets the wall going and there are undocumented immigrants building that wall.
It wouldn't surprise me if the wall was just completely built on the Mexican side by Mexicans. I mean,
let's export, yeah. Hey, if he's having the suits made in Mexico, let's have the border wall manufactured and put up in Mexico as well. I mean, why stop?
Exactly. Labor would be so much cheaper. I think he would probably be all about that.
Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpakman, and follow producer Lewis on Twitter @LewisMotomedy. Lewis increasingly active on Twitter. We'll take a break. Lots happening after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is fortunately not funded by big media conglomerates or huge corporations, but rather directly by our audience through this thing called the David Pakman Show membership program. You can read all about it at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Eric Tim. Eric Tim. Now, Lewis, you tend to have a distrust for people that have two first names, but I hope that doesn't apply to Eric.
No, not at all. Plus, there are two M's on this last name, so it's not exactly like the first name.
Exactly. You can join Eric as a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Hey, we haven't really been talking about this because between the fundraiser and our vacation and so many other things, it has sort of crept up on us. But Monday, August 17th, 2005 is a very special day because it is the 10-year anniversary of the David Pakman Show. Now, it hasn't always been the David Pakman Show. Back in August of 2005, it started as an every other week community radio show called Midweek Politics with David Pakman at WXOJ, a low-powered FM station in Northampton, Massachusetts. Do you remember, Lewis, when you joined the show? Was it 07 or 08?
I'm not sure. I think it was probably, I would say 06, right? I mean, you weren't doing it for that long before I joined.
Maybe not. And of course, after Lewis joined the show changed drastically from once every other week to once a week to twice a week to 4 times a week and most recently to 5 times a week. We've gone through multiple studios starting at WXOJ in Northampton, Massachusetts, moving out to a very small single room space in Northampton, Massachusetts, then up to Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Massachusetts, where we had a great space. Ultimately to New York City with Lewis in Austin, Texas. And then now the show, of course, moving to Boston, Massachusetts in the next 4 to 6 weeks or so. We're working out those details. And it's incredible, Lewis, that back when I was an undergrad, the show started, continued during my time as a graduate student at Bentley University in the Boston area, continuing through multiple iterations, and we've now outlasted more than 98% of the shows that started in 2005. And I'm hoping that the next 3 years, based on what we have planned, will be as big as the last 10.
Yes, I would like to, of course, I would like to see some exponential growth here. And I think being in Boston will help. I think we're on the right track.
And to celebrate all of this, we have a great membership special. If you go to davidpakman.com/10 years, so that's the number 10 years, davidpakman.com/10 years, because it's the 10-year anniversary, you get, for starters, 10% off of a yearly membership. But in addition to that, we will give you a free David Pakman Show t-shirt made from none other than 100% recycled materials. And we will give you a free David Pakman Show bumper sticker, good for putting on your car or your laptop or your fridge or your school notebooks or wherever. This is like 40% off. It is such an awesome deal. Be part of the next 10 years of the David Pakman Show. Go to davidpakman.com/10 years. That deal ends in 5 days on the eve of the 10-year anniversary. Several times now, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, also a Republican presidential candidate, declared that Planned Parenthood should lose federal funding. This is not really a very controversial suggestion within the Republican Party, right? I mean, it's a very popular idea among Republican candidates. But in talking about that, Jeb Bush also proudly stated that when he was governor of Florida, he defunded Planned Parenthood. And in talking about this, he also talks about how bad Planned Parenthood is. Michelle Garcia looked into this and wrote it up on Mike.com and figured out that much of the reason for which Planned Parenthood is so terrible in Florida is because Jeb Bush defunded it. It's true that Jeb Bush withdrew funding for Planned Parenthood back in 2001. He cut over $300,000 for family planning services for poor women through Planned Parenthood. And the aftermath, just a few years later, is that the Center for Reproductive Rights put together a report which showed that Florida was tied last year with Oklahoma and Arkansas as the worst state for women's well-being in the country. 25% of women in Florida are uninsured, second only to Texas. And all of this, Lewis, happening as a result of Jeb Bush's defunding of Planned Parenthood. It's a really great tactic, right? Defund a group and then talk about how poorly their operations are going, not mentioning that your own choice to defund the group is to blame.
And working perfectly for Jeb Bush. We know the animosity that the Republican Party has towards Planned Parenthood. And, you know, it's unfortunate the power that people like Jeb Bush have in their respective states.
And they're able to wield that power to make not controversial issues controversial. Planned Parenthood is not controversial. 3% of what they do is abortion services, which, by the way, are legal medical procedures. 97% of what they do is prevention, STD screening, education, birth control, stuff that prevents pregnancy. And I was thinking about how ridiculous the list of what becomes controversial in this country is. Gay marriage, which should be a total non-issue, hugely controversial, big wedge issue. Reasonable sex education, not same-sex education, reasonable sex education, a total non-issue, becomes a huge issue for Republicans. Cake baking. Imagine, Lewis, cake baking has become hugely controversial in this country. And of course, family planning organizations, which should not be a controversial issue, hugely controversial. We should be talking about the campaign finance system, debating the successes and failures of modern capitalism and how that bodes for the future of the U.S., or how the American economy should prepare for the next wave in the labor movement as more and more jobs become automated, restructuring human activities on Earth to reduce our impact on the planet. No, instead it's cake baking, family planning, and gay marriage.
Yeah, issues that you have to appear to be passionate about or acting proactively on, so that you can continue to win elections, I suppose.
A judge has sentenced a Texas man to either get married or face jail time. Jostin Bundy was arrested in March and charged with assault causing bodily injury. The man that Jostin assaulted was the ex-boyfriend of his current girlfriend, Elizabeth Janes. Jostin Bundy stood in front of a judge in Smith County, Texas, when he was given a choice, jail or marriage. Now, the charge against him was a misdemeanor, and if Bundy decided to take the jail option, he would have been forced to spend just about 2 weeks behind bars. Instead, he chose to marry his girlfriend, Elizabeth Janes. Jostin was posed the question of, is she worth it, by the Smith County judge. I guess he believed she was, because he elected to avoid jail time by getting married. The additional provisions, Lewis, mandated that Jostin not only marry Janes within 30 days, but that he go to counseling and that he write scripture from the Bible. That judge, like many others, should be removed from his position. Not only is it not legal to give someone the option of marriage over jail, it is not in accordance with the law to assign writing from any religious source, be it the Christian Bible or the Islamic Quran. That is against the law. And these people, Lewis, like this judge, are in positions of power in this country.
Well, we covered a story very similar to this one maybe a year or two ago, in which a judge sentenced someone to go to church.
Yeah.
And I believe that judge was disbarred. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe you're right. And that's clearly what should happen here, right? I mean, is there any question that saying writing Bible passages and marrying someone is a possible alternative to jail? That is against the law.
Yeah, this is clearly someone who should not be in this position. They've got to go, and luckily, because of the internet and this story going viral, that will probably happen.
Anytime I am presented with a story about judges acting in this way, and I say, how can they really be judges? I think back, Lewis, to our buddy Louis Gohmert, congressman from Texas, who, as insane and disconnected from reality he is, as dogmatically religious as he is as a legislator, he was a judge in Texas.
Yes, and I wonder if there were any sentences like this under his, watch as a judge. This was, of course, before we had these viral methods of distributing these stories, so who knows?
Make sure to give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Bill Scher is with us today. He's senior writer at Campaign for America's Future and a contributing editor at Politico. He has an interesting article out called "To Win, Bernie Can't Be Bernie." So, Bill, what are you talking about here? Is the argument that Bernie can sort of stick to his sincerely held political beliefs or try to come up with some positions that will better position him to win, but he can't really do both?
Well, the argument is not that Bernie has to have a wholesale personality transformation or completely scrap his fundamental principles. But the point is that the history of insurgent campaigns, they either plateau once they've consolidated their core following, but don't appeal to those voters who aren't initially sold, or they make some tweaks. The classic example, of course, is most recently is Barack Obama. Barack Obama, he started off on the basis of being against the Iraq War and saying he was going to do diplomacy with Iran. But when push came to shove, he didn't, take on every single purist liberal position one could find when forced to hedge on things like warrantless wiretapping or on oil drilling. He wouldn't necessarily just go right wing, but he would scale back a notch just to say, look, I'm going to be flexible. I might have said I was for single payer 15 years ago, but I'm not going to advocate for that today. Things like that. Bernie has a generally uncompromising nature, so he doesn't usually do that. But you go back into his background, he did play a little footsie with the NRA to get into the House back in the 90s. He's not above a little Machiavellian politics when it suits his needs, but he has sort of pledged he's going to put forth a new Medicare for All plan now. I think tactics like that are probably going to limit his ability if his game is to actually win the nomination. There's other reasons to run without outright winning, but if that's the goal, putting forth a new single-payer plan probably isn't the path to get there. Okay, so single-payer you think is on the list of policies that maybe would need to be moderated a little bit for him to have a better shot. What other specific ideas do you think he's going to have to sort of scale back on to be more broadly appealing? Well, he has indicated he's going to have a tax reform plan that's going to put the top-end tax rate above 50%. Now, this is a little bit more untested, I think, than single-payer, but there is some polling out there to suggest that going over 50% is going to be a bridge too far with a lot of folks. It just lends itself to a very easy talking point. The government's going to take away more than half of your money if you're successful. Yeah, maybe there's something specific about 50%, but I think there it's more of a micro than a macro decision to be made. And the reason I say that is, recent Gallup poll, majority, 52%, not a huge majority, but a majority think government taxation on the rich should actually be used to reduce the wealth gap, which 63% of Americans agree is currently unfair, right? The current distribution of wealth. So the 50%, more or less, maybe sort of an idea, a number that may impact people, but broadly speaking, using taxation to reduce the income gap is something people do support. Yeah, the thrust of it is fine. It's not that Bernie is pointing in the wrong ideological direction. That's not the issue. It's a question, how far do you take it in the midst of a presidential campaign? Again, if the goal is to actually win. Now, if the goal is to push the center of gravity of debate, there is a good argument for going beyond the bounds of the politically pragmatic. Why not go for a 55% top-end tax rate if it moves Hillary a few more points in your direction and makes her position look more moderate? That is a perfectly fine goal to be had. So I'm not saying Bernie has to do things a certain way. It just depends on what his objective is. Okay, I want to talk about what we could expect to see in the 6 Democratic debates that have been announced. But before we get to that, I want to talk just a little bit with you about your reaction to these numbers that Bernie is drawing.
estimates between 20,000 to 28,000 people in Portland. And I think sometimes we read these numbers and maybe they strike us as large numbers or maybe they don't. But it's not that common for a non-incumbent presidential candidate during the primary season to be drawing these significant numbers. What can we really draw? Can we draw any conclusions, though, about Bernie's candidacy from these numbers alone?
I wouldn't draw too much. It does show that he has fervent support within that part of the progressive populist wing of the Democratic Party. But let's not forget, Ralph Nader was doing super rallies in the general election in October of 2000, 20,000 person plus rallies. And they were arguing, look, this shows how immensely popular Ralph Nader is. Well, he got about 2%. Now, granted, it was 2% in some critical areas of the country, but it was an indication that he was wildly popular throughout the country. Bernie's hitting the bluest of the blue dots of the campaign trail right now, and that's fine for a beginning. But if the game is to win, and part of his game is to say that his populist platform has resonance beyond the left wing of the Democratic base, he has to show he has support outside of Madison, Wisconsin, Seattle, Portland, etc. So
that is something we may learn more about once these debates get going. And as we talked about yesterday on the show, 6 Democratic debates announced. The first is going to be in Nevada, I believe, somewhere mid-October, October 13th, I think. And Bernie Sanders right now, if you look at some of the polling does seem to suggest that part of what's holding him back is a name recognition issue. So when people are asked, well, would you consider voting for Bernie Sanders? The numbers are not hugely overpowering, but at the same time, he seems to be having a name recognition issue. So what's your view on what he needs to do in the debates for us to really figure out whether he could be a truly viable candidate as a Democratic primary winner, or whether he's going to hit a sort of ceiling, as you suggest?
Well, and I think going back to the rallies there, the rallies are good for name recognition. So it's not that it's a bad idea to have these rallies. You got to start somewhere. He gets news coverage from them. It's just a question of what's the next step. Now, the first debate's in October. They have debates scheduled for once a month going through the early primaries, which some are complaining, oh, that's not enough debates. They should be having more like in 2008. But, you can make the most of 4, 5, 6 debates if you have a good strategy. It only takes one debate to have a really crystallizing moment that helps you with the breakout. So for Bernie, he is fairly loath to go on a personal attack, which is laudable. He likes to stick to issues. Now, you look at the Republican debate on Fox, say what you will about Fox, they know how to make good television.
Well, that was exactly my reaction, which is they really crafted something that gets good sound bites, but there was no substantive policy debate to speak of.
Well, there's no substantive policy debate, one, because the candidates don't have a lot of substantive policy positions, and the moderators chose not to press them on that fact because, look, for TV purposes, fighting about Donald Trump going third party or his past misogynistic comments, that makes for better television. So Bernie is, real meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
So he can't play the provocative soundbite game as easily, but he needs to find a way to have some kind of confrontation. It can be substantive, but something that draws Hillary into a back and forth with him that draws a favorable contrast. Hillary got very tripped up in 2007 on a couple of debates. One was when she thought it was wise to attack Obama for his position to negotiate with Iran and Venezuela, North Korea, personally, in his first year. She thought that would make her seem more like the elder stateswoman. In fact, it made her seem like part of the past problem. A second debate that went bad for her was over immigration and driver's licenses, because it seemed like she was playing both sides of the issue. It fed notions that she was overly calculated. Now, those were mistakes that she made, less so much things that her opponents did, although they pounced at those moments. And maybe that's what Bernie has to do. Find that moment to pounce on where she's being a little bit too cute to to say, look, I'm the politician of conviction, not the one of convenience, and that's why I'd be a better general election candidate.
In the limited time we have left, I just want to get your thoughts on the possible areas for someone like Bernie to go after Hillary Clinton on. Would you go after TPP and Hillary Clinton's long list of pro-TPP comments as Secretary of State, followed by more recently making a sort of overarching, let's be careful about TPP sort of sentiment? Could TPP be an interesting area? And if you were Bernie Sanders, would you focus on Hillary Clinton's connections to companies like Goldman Sachs and the private prison lobbyists also fundraising for her? Or do you think that those are not good paths to go down?
Probably the latter has more potency to it, because that kind of gets to a question of your underlying values. It's less issue specific, but more sort of who are you fighting for? And I think something that has more of an overarching element to it probably strikes a bigger chord. There are certainly voters out there that are very animated about trade, but I think we just had a big trade fight, which Obama won. You didn't see Obama's numbers collapse with the left because he's supported. It doesn't mean they all agree with him on it, but it wasn't the issue for everybody. Whereas, ties to Goldman Sachs, I think, speak to a larger question.
Well, it's going to be fascinating. There is no question about that. Bill Scher, senior writer at Campaign for America's Future and contributing editor at Politico, will be watching it. We will be watching it. Bill, thank you as always.
Take care.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The Milwaukee, Wisconsin Police Department recently announced that it's going to be equipping patrol cars with a device that shoots GPS projectiles. So what this is a technology that fires a tracking device, which looks like a large shotgun shell with adhesive on it, which then attaches to the back of a moving vehicle, and it sends location data to police in real time, so police can track the vehicle with this projectile that they shoot and attach to a vehicle. Now, the ACLU has weighed in on this, and they say any use of GPS tracking technology outside the heat of a chase should require a warrant. So is this legal? This is okay to do if the device is used only in police chases that commence when a police officer has the equivalent of probable cause of wrongdoing. So if there's a chase going on and there's probable cause of wrongdoing and police fire one of these GPS projectiles and it attaches to the car and the car drives away, police are allowed to use this technology to track the location of the vehicle. But as the ACLU says, they should be immediately pursuing them. They cannot say, well, they got away, and now for 3 days we're going to use the location data from this GPS tracker to figure out where this person is going and what they're doing, to build a list of other addresses, which we will later blah, 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 blah. That would be activity that requires a search warrant. And this is increasingly going to be an issue, Lewis, as we have the technological means and things like GPS projectiles to track the movements of individuals. Increasingly, we are going to have to delineate which of these activities require warrants and which do not. The ACLU is pretty clear on this one in terms of what can and cannot be done without a warrant.
Yeah, and I think that this can be a great tool. Let's say that there is some type of chase happening. Perhaps you could use this tool so that it's not really a high-speed chase that could end up with people getting hurt.
Yeah, there's very clear ways in which this could deflate the possibilities of significant injury and property damage from high-speed chases. But at the same time, we have to be wary of how this could be misused.
Oh, yeah, of course. With the surveillance climate as it is in this country right now, certainly I imagine plenty of people have exploding heads over hearing about this news.
For the first time ever, astronauts on the International Space Station will be able to eat fresh food grown in the microgravity environment of the space station. Expedition 44 crew members, including NASA's one-year astronaut Scott Kelly, are ready to sample the fruits of their labor. They've harvested a crop of red romaine lettuce. The astronauts will be able to clean the leafy greens with a citric acid-based food sanitizing wipe that they've developed, Lewis, before consuming them. They will eat half of the space vegetables and set aside the other half to be packaged, frozen, and sent back to Earth for scientific analysis. NASA is maturing what they call veggie technology on the space station. This is so huge because the future of space travel and of living in space and of getting to faraway places in space is going to, in great part, be impacted by being able to grow food, having a sustainable food source in space. This is a critical part of a potential journey to Mars, where, of course, humans are going to need to start growing food in outer space.
Yeah, this is big. I guess the food they have there now has a certain lifespan, and the food that we use. And so, of course, this is absolutely necessary if we're going to do what we're planning on doing.
And another interesting element of this is that these veggies, the space lettuce, was grown with light from red, blue, and green LEDs. And this is interesting because we've reported on some of these vertical food farms that are very, very much more productive than outdoor farms in the U.S. I think there was one in Japan that is really the successful one. There's ideas of these in the U.S., and those are also using LED technology. And there's a lot of research going on there with regard to growing produce with LED technology. So much here, hugely interesting. I do wonder what space vegetables taste like, Lewis. You think that they're more bland than the vegetables grown on Earth?
I would say probably not. I would say they're probably equally bland, maybe even a little bit better, because just so much of the stuff here is completely flavorless.
Yes, but think for a second about how, in spite of a lot of U.S. vegetables being flavorless, a lot of them are not, because they are grown in very enriched soil with all sorts of fertilizer and blah, 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 blah. If you eliminate all of those sorts of flavoring elements to grow vegetables in a more sterile space environment, I could imagine how they could be more bland.
I guess that's possible. But if you are taking the time to control every little detail, despite being in space and despite how difficult it might be, perhaps you could grow some pretty tasty stuff.
All right, let's go to your voicemails. 219-2-David-P. Yesterday, Lewis, when talking about the Democratic debates, said he may not watch every single debate, and that was not a comment that was well received by some in the audience. Let's take a listen to this voicemail.
Hi, this is John from Highbridge, Lewis, and I would just like to say that I'm sorry, but you're going to have to watch every single one of the Democratic debates. I've grown to value your opinion on the news and politics very much, and you owe it to us as a responsibility to have complete knowledge of what's going on so you can issue us the facts. Thank you. Bye.
What do you think about that, Lewis? This member of the audience saying that you have a responsibility as someone that people are listening to in terms of their opinion on politics to be properly informed of everything that happens in these debates. And Lewis, as the future production manager of the network to be named in the future, don't you think that that is a responsibility that you have?
Well, I don't think I can be expected to watch every minute of every debate. However, you can count on me watching some of the highlights and more notable parts of the debate. I think that's fair, right? I mean, I do have a life. I am a busy guy.
I will not comment on this. We will allow the audience to determine what is fair and not fair for Lewis with regard to debate observation during this upcoming primary period. On today's bonus show, we will talk about the New Zealand flag referendum. The Rick Perry campaign stops paying staffers. What is that all about? We'll tell you about it. Rick Perry once did a rain dance, so maybe he could do a cash dance. Maybe that would work. And a father lets his daughter drown because honor. Because honor. We will talk about those stories and more on the bonus show. Remember, davidpakman.com/10 years, the number 10 years, 10% off a membership, a free t-shirt, and a free bumper sticker to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the David Pakman Show. Make an investment in the next 10 years of the show, and we will talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.